Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in AML. I'm John Byrne, Chair of the AMLRS Advisory Board.
And I'm Elliot Berman, our Creative Director. We are excited to welcome you to the This Week in AML podcast,
where we explore key news and developments in the global financial crime prevention community.
Hi, John. How are you this week?
Hi, Elliot. Fine, thanks. How's it going?
Okay. So I'm assuming that you saw that Homeland Security Investigations, part of big Homeland Security, announced earlier this week the launch of something called Operation Boiling Point.
Right. And it's interesting because this is sort of consistent with the overall priorities issued last year, because this particular priority focuses on transnational criminal organizations as well as domestic. So we know, because we've talked about it earlier, that HSI has several projects in the works, including this one that looks at organized theft, which has become obviously a massive problem, and also to deal with it, the concept of partnership with the private sector, which is obviously something that our community embraces. So yeah, I did see that, and it's again just another step in what HSI has been working on for quite a while.
Yes, it is a massive undertaking, and one of the things they point out in the on the website that they've created for the for this project is that they're not talking about shoplifting.
Right.
I think many people, and I would include myself, when the first time someone says something about retail theft, what pops in your head is shoplifting, which some people would say is a victimless crime. This is about massive organized theft, sometimes at the retail level, but also cargo theft and other, as you pointed out, both domestic and international activity. And it's on a huge scale. They talked about that the impact of this on the average U.S. family is $500 of additional costs that they'll spend during a year for goods and services as a result of the adverse impact of this kind of activity. Which is doesn't, on the one hand, it doesn't sound big, but if you do a little arithmetic, all of a sudden it's a pretty big number.
Yeah, and to your point, why does this matter? It matters because of the scale. They said the increase in fiscal year 2021, 211% increase in terms of cases initiated, and 61 criminal arrests, 59 cases. But they also point out the impact and what we face, inflation and other issues. This just continues to add to that. So if you think about pandemic, organized retail theft, all of these things have an impact on day-to-day economic challenges, right? So the boiling point if you go to the website and look at their description of how this works, it's really fascinating. They talk about cargo theft, which is something that you wouldn't necessarily right away look at and say, oh, I can see where these thefts occur. But cargo theft being a big thing because they're targeting building supplies, pharmaceuticals, anything that's getting shipped, right? So that's part of it. Electronics, those sorts of things, and then other activities. I always thought this was kind of strange. Vehicles for their catalytic converters, because I guess they contain precious metals in them. Things like that obviously criminals are so focused on, and at least I would think, gee, why are they after those sorts of things? So pretty interesting. But what I liked about it in terms of it their focus is on awareness, the enforcement, and partnering. And the partnering with retail groups, of course, but they also mention and they've talked about, and they've done this before, partnering with our community, the financial sector.
Yes, and it's important for folks in the financial crime prevention community to understand that while these may not directly be financial crimes, once the goods are stolen, they need to be liquidated. Ultimately, the goal is to get, spendable funds. And as we all know, part of that liquidation process is also to make those funds appear legitimate. So that's really where the money laundering connection is. The focal point is primarily of Boiling Point is at the front end to actually interdict the actual thefts, but clearly they want to attack. If you want to think about these thefts as really being part of a criminal supply chain, they want to intercede at every level, and one level is the money laundering level.
Right, and yeah, that's it. So the middleman, they do say that obviously in some cases people that are what they call boosters are stealing the goods and selling them on their own, but most of the time they're sold to a fence, right? And that person or persons purchases the merchandise at a fraction of the retail value, and then they sell them, and they sell them through e-commerce websites, social media, wholesale trading distribution companies. Going back to the issue about catalytic converters and people stealing other items out of cars, there's obviously a black market for this stuff, and so making people more aware is one of the key goals here. But obviously, there's a lot of criminal activity throughout this process, and it just becomes, how do you figure this out? And I think, like again, going back to my original point that I've mentioned now a couple times, partnering with the private sector, and so I know they're dealing with the National Retail Federation and other similar groups, and that becomes pretty important. But also the partnering with other law enforcement agencies, and I think HSI deserves a lot of credit for doing that. I think certainly that's been the mindset of HSI for quite a while, is that's to work with their partners, not just at the federal level, FBI, IRS, but also the state level.
Yeah, one of the things that we all can do is there will be there is a functionality on the website where you can sign up for email updates on Operation Boiling Point. What those updates will look like, we don't know yet, but likely those would be useful for all of us to pay attention to as we see their success stories. There may be some topology information or investigative information that we can all use to improve, our efforts to deal with the financial crime component of this.
Yeah, and the other part of this too that they call out, and this is for our policymakers, is that there's currently no federal laws that directly target this. So prosecution is not simple because the crimes are typically multi-jurisdictional, multi-state. So that's also something to highlight. Given the rise in all of this, should there be specific laws dedicated to this? Also, they mention that there's been an increase in violence, which is something that seems logical that would be the case, but you don't think about that necessarily. So when they talk to the private sector groups, they said, that's why people are losing jobs, or they're leaving jobs saying, we don't want to be involved in a retail operation where we put ourselves at risk. So I think that's important. And, again, they focus on high value items, and then also common retailers that get targeted are pharmacies, big box retailers, home improvement stores, those sorts of things. And we've all seen some of that in media reports, right? So there's a lot going on here, but the fact that there's no laws that are dedicated here is something to call out. The importance of working with other local and state and federal authorities is important, but also recognizing this has a very negative effect on the economy and the community.
Right. The other piece of the economic impact is where these goods are sold on black markets, there's no tax collected. And so
Right.
the various taxing authorities are, losing funds too. So this is, up and down the economy, not just at any one level.
Right. So check it out when you get a chance. Look at HSI's website. It's Operation Boiling Point. I just want to highlight as we close this down, we have a webinar coming up on October 27th. We will be reviewing where we stand with the AMLO law from a couple of years ago. There's been obviously some changes, including the beneficial owner regulation that's out. We'll have a nice discussion with a couple of experts, Megan Hodge from Ally Bank, and Dan Stepano, former OCC enforcement director, will be covering that and some of the other issues in AMLA, because even though it's not moved as quickly as I think folks would have hoped, there are still some things to think about for internal training purposes. And so we're going to discuss that on October 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
Yes, and you can register for the webinar at our website, amlrightsource.com. So, John, good to talk to you, and we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, Elliot. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.